We now have had some time to digest the 2023 NFL draft, so we get into full draft grades for the Baltimore Ravens 6-player draft class, all that and much more coming up next here on this episode of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another episode of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I am your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire. We're here, as always, on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here with us on Locked On Ravens, making us your first listen each and every day. We are free and available on all podcasting platforms, including over in video form on YouTube. So be sure to subscribe for free, both in video form and in audio form. You can like this video on YouTube and, of course, subscribe. And, of course, subscribe in audio, too, and also follow along there, whether you're an everyday or you listen every day to this show. If it's your first time in or if you're, again, somewhere in between, welcome in or welcome back. 5 days a week, your Monday through Friday Ravens content. So if you, a friend, a family member, want that Ravens coverage analysis here, be sure to keep it Locked On Ravens. We'll be providing you daily updates, as we have now for my 988th episode of this show. And here on this episode of Locked On Ravens in this midweek edition, we're going to now dive into a little more draft talk. And, the draft happened a couple weeks ago. It's almost old news at this point, right? Where you're like, come on, it happened last month, but they, again, took 6 players. The Ravens did in this draft. I thought it was a very solid draft, but we've had a couple of weeks now to kind of figure out, okay, where do these guys fit? Look at their skill sets, look at the stats, the tape, etc. Right as you're coming out of the draft, things can be reactionary. I kind of briefly brushed over grades, but now I want to get into full draft grades on today's show. So in the first 2 segments, we'll be looking at that. In the first segment here, we'll be talking about the first 3 picks of their draft. So we'll be talking about Mr. Zay Flowers, and then getting into Trenton Simpson and Tavius Robinson. Then we'll get into the final 3 picks of their draft class, of course, Kaihu'u Blue Kelly and the 2 offensive linemen. And then overall draft grades, we'll throw some undrafted free agent talk in there as well. And then in the final segment, we'll get into our mailbag, talk about this Ravens team, what to expect from them moving forward, especially in, I think, what is a really big 2023 season for them. So let's dive into the content. First, starting off with Zay Flowers. How we're going to do this is we're going to go through each player and give a grade for them. We'll talk about what they mean to the team, how they can be utilized both this year and their rookie year moving forward. Then again, at the end of the second part of the show here, we're going to give my full grade. So let's start with Zay Flowers, 22nd overall pick. We had an episode about, was Zay Flowers the right pick for the Ravens? And again, these grades, you never really can grade these things until a couple of years down the line. That's why some people, don't give out grades right away or even, pretty soon after. They want to wait a couple of years and just say, let's just sit back and watch these guys, and that'll be that. But I think you can give initial grades and then based off of time change those. So initially for Zay Flowers, a pick where you put him in this offense, another explosive weapon for Lamar Jackson, next to Odell Beckham, next to Rashad Bateman, Mark Andrews, J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards, etc. You have a plethora of guys there. Zay Flowers, not the biggest or necessarily the heaviest guy when you turn like a big, burly wide receiver. He's not that, but he is strong. He's a strong player, but a little bit, I guess, if you want to call him undersized, sure. I don't think he's not like a 5'7" receiver, but he's someone who, with the explosive ability, he's a 3-level receiver, which I like about him. He can play in the short game, play intermediate, and also he can be a threat in the deep passing game with, again, he's not like a burner. He can outrun anybody on the field. That's not necessarily his game, but I call it deceptive speed. I've called that with some of these players before. I think Zay Flowers has that. Now, drops were a bit of an issue at Boston College, but a lot of people are kind of on this Zay Flowers hype train, as the pick is kind of settled in for a lot of people. There have been prominent people who have said, for example, Tony Jefferson, my former Ravens safety, said that Zay Flowers looks like a combination of Brandon Cooks and Antonio Brown on the field. On the field. Antonio Brown off the field. Not what he said. He said Antonio Brown on the field. But again, those are big comparisons. And for a player like Flowers, who is extremely incredible in the open field. He can make guys miss. We see, you just watch the tape, cutback ability, burst in the open field too. This is someone where if you can work him over the middle of the field, he can also make contested catches. The thing is, he plays bigger than his size, right? So while size, sure, maybe it's a concern, how does that hold up against NFL level talent in the secondary? I personally think it'll be fine. I think what's more concerning is the drop situation. Can he get that figured out? But if that can be figured out, I think this can be a really good pick for them. I give it an A-. I think this was a really solid pick for them, and I'm excited to see him play. I think based off everything we have seen and, heard from him, he has seemingly bought into the Ravens culture, bought into being in Baltimore, which is really big, right? You want to have somebody, especially coming in on their rookie contract. Again, a lot of these guys they're just excited to, be in the NFL, get their shot, but really seems like Zay Flowers is excited, talk to Odell, talk to Lamar. There's already that connection there. Feels like a good pick for them. So I'll give it an A-. Moving on to Trenton Simpson. This was one where, again, you want to have your initial reaction kind of settle down and look at it from a broader perspective here. Trenton Simpson was one I was confused initially at, but as I've kind of figured it out, again, looked at the tape, looked at the film, figured out where he could fit in, this is a pick to me where they don't have to rely on a player like Trenton Simpson, and they can take a swing on that upside. As I've said before, if you're an everydayer, you've heard me say this. Outside of Zay Flowers, I don't think this draft class has to play a ton. And in fact, I really don't think they should play a ton, if we're being completely honest here. Trenton Simpson is somebody who, behind Roquan Smith and Patrick Queen, at the inside linebacker position, is a really solid third option there. But again, why are you drafting an inside linebacker when you just signed Roquan Smith and Patrick Queen is there? They obviously declined Queen's fifth-year option. But then the speculation began about, well, okay, how can they fit Trenton Simpson into this year's defensive system? Maybe it's playing him outside. He, again, just a background on him, super athletic guy, versatile, can play pretty much anywhere on the defense. He can play an inside linebacker, play on the edge as a pass rusher. You can put him deep. You can put him in the middle of it. Like, you can put him literally almost anywhere. And that's a huge asset to a Ravens defense that we've talked about it here is kind of moving into that positionless type of era. Trenton Simpson is somebody who his coverage ability pops off the screen, very fluid in his movements, very solid run stuffer as well. He shoots gaps effectively. Also, just again, an explosive player, but behind a guy like Roquan Smith and a Patrick Queen, if that's what, he's going to get on the field in some situations, but you don't have to play him 90% of snaps this year, which I think is completely fine for them. So to me, I give this one a B. It wasn't necessarily my favorite pick for them. Obviously, the Ravens and Eric DeCosta, again, I've mentioned this part on the show before. He provided insight after the pick of Trenton Simpson, where he said they had about, I think he said 7 or 8 guys on their board entering round 3. And then by the end, Trenton Simpson was the only guy left. So their best player available team, they'll take the best player available. But to me, I think, at this point, Trenton Simpson's a B pick, not a bad one by any stretch of the imagination. I'm not saying that. But I know that a lot of people wanted a corner there. There was some, Keely Ringo was someone who everybody wanted. Apparently there were character and medical concerns there. But the Ravens, they got a corner later. We'll talk about him in the second segment. But B for me for Trenton Simpson. Then let's move on. Tavius Robinson, a player that super long, super athletic, and outside linebacker. Now, you can play him both inside and outside. Again, this is what I'm talking about, positionless versatility. You can play Tavius Robinson inside. You can put him outside as well. I'll say a solid B+ or so. I definitely think the Robinson pick was fine. You don't have to play him a lot. In fact, he is someone who was raw in his game, but he has the athletic tools and upside that you want in a pick like that. And this is going to be huge in terms of if they're relying on Aumavae-Laulu and David Ojabo and maybe bringing in a Justin Houston, Jadeveon Clowney. We talked a lot on yesterday's show about post-draft free agent targets, so be sure to check that one out. There are a lot of outside linebackers, edge, defensive end type players that could fit this team. But Tavius Robinson, you don't want to put him in there and rely on him for 10 sacks in the rookie season, especially with how raw he still is. But while he attacks the football, uses his length to his advantage, I don't think this is a this-year pick. I think this year it has to be Aumavae-Laulu, David Ojabo, Tyus Bowser, and if the Ravens bring in a veteran, that player. Tavius Robinson can play in certain spots. If they need some interior defensive line depth, you can put him at defensive end. But I think Tavius Robinson would be best suited in a situational role this year while being able to branch out his game, learn this year, and then I think have a great second season. So A-, B, and B+, not a bad overall first 3 grades for Baltimore, but coming up, we'll be diving into the last 3 grades, talking about Kaihu'u Blue Kelly and the 2 offensive linemen. So be sure to stay tuned, a ton to dive into on the show. But first, this episode is brought to you by Built Bar, and if you're looking for a delicious snack with all the sugar and calories and you need the best tasting protein bar ever, in Built, and if you're like me, you want to make healthier snack choices, but you don't want to compromise on taste, I've got just the thing for you with Built Bars and Built Puffs. Built Bars are healthy and taste amazing. Seriously, they taste so amazing, you won't think they're even good for you. And what makes them so good is, for starters, they're covered in 100% real chocolate, and they come in unbelievable flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, and cookies and cream. And they only have 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, and a whopping 17 grams of protein. Nice and even needs a way to take a box for years. Been talking about ordering Built Bars at Built.com, and now you can get them at your local Walmart or Sam's Club, while you can still get your specialty flavors at Built.com. That's right. Head to your nearest Walmart today. Walk to the pharmacy section and grab yourself a box of Built Bars. You can pick up a 4-bar box of cookies and cream bar, double chocolate, or coconut puff. And if you're close to a Sam's Club, run and grab a 13-bar box of that flavor, such as brownie batter puff and churro puff. You can thank me later. We're back here, our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still here with you on this Wednesday. Thank you so much again for being here with us today on the show. But let's now dive into the final 3 picks of Baltimore's 2023 draft. Full grade again. We've had some time to have everything settle, right? Initial reactions right after the pick is made, first couple weeks after the draft. I want to make sure that I have enough time personally to go through tape, go through film, figure out skill sets, figure out fit for this team before dishing out full official grades. And again, you can't really make official predictions till a couple years down the line, but initial grades are still okay. So we talked about Zay Flowers, Trenton Simpson, Tavius Robinson. Let's now move on to the final 3 picks of Baltimore's 6th player, kind of a small draft class compared to their recent years, but 6-player draft class. Kaihu'u Blue Kelly out of Stanford, the corner, was their next selection. And this is a pick where, again, you're kind of thinking throughout the entirety of this draft up to this point, where's the corner? Where's the corner? Why wouldn't they take a corner at 86? Why wouldn't they do it in the 4th round? Why are they taking these, front 7 players? Why are they taking Zay Flowers? But they finally get their corner, Kaihu'u Blue Kelly out of Stanford. Now, this is an experienced player, a 4-year guy at Stanford, started his last 2 seasons there, and is someone who I think fits the profile that the Ravens look for in a corner. It's stuff that I kind of talked about initially after the pick was made a couple weeks ago, but he's a physical player. And we look in the Ravens secondary, Marlon Humphrey is one of the most physical corners in the NFL. There's no doubt about that. They also have other players, like look at the safeties they have. Marcus Williams, underrated physical player, I think. Kyle Hamilton, super physical. Both his safety, can play in the nickel role as well. Rock Ya-Sin, who they signed, right? This is another aspect of that. Rock Ya-Sin, who they brought in, a former wrestling star, and is absolutely, he's suplexing guys on the field. He's literally just picking guys up and throwing them down. He's a physical player. Kaihu'u Blue Kelly fits that. The physicality stands out on tape for him. But the thing that I like also about him is that he has a very high football IQ. He knows where to position himself and is also around the ball a lot. Now, it didn't really translate to interceptions at Stanford. I believe only 3 interceptions in his 4 years there, but over 20 pass deflections, which again, just because you're not picking off passes doesn't mean you're not around the ball making an impact. If you're batting the ball down, you're around the football. At least that's how I classify it. Interceptions are great. They're turnovers. I think if he can up his turnover potential and turnover ability at the NFL level, 100% a win for the Ravens there. But for what the Ravens were looking for, and again, as I mentioned in the first segment and before, you don't have to play, well, at least if they sign, they definitely don't if they sign another guy, but it doesn't feel like they have to play Kaihu'u Blue Kelly a ton this year. Now, I will say, and this maybe is a bold prediction based off of where the Ravens draft class is and who's ready to play, who's not. Outside of Zay Flowers, I think the next guy who could get the most amount of playing time throughout this Ravens 2023 season in their draft class is Kaihu'u Blue Kelly, because of the need they have at corner still, I believe. And look, if Marcus Peters goes to the Raiders, which we talked about yesterday, he visited Las Vegas. If that happens, if the Ravens decide they're cool with their guys, maybe Kaihu'u Blue Kelly is the one that has to step up for them when the Ravens maybe are going through some injuries or struggling at the position or something of that sort. He's experienced, and I think he can step in. I know a lot of people, if you ask, well, outside of Zay Flowers, who's going to play the most from the rookie class in 2023, well, I think a lot of people would say Trenton Simpson, so I'm going to go bold there, and I'm going to say Kaihu'u Blue Kelly. I give this pick an A, though. I liked it a lot. Very good value. I think the Ravens saw Kaihu'u Blue Kelly as someone who should have gone maybe early day 3. They found him in the 5th round, and they said, hey, look who we found, another gem here. So I'm excited for Kaihu'u Blue Kelly in Baltimore, especially the physicality aspect, which I talked about. So I like that pick a lot. Then next we have, this is the mini run for the Ravens on offensive linemen in Aumavae-Laulu out of Oregon. And again, still getting the name down, but I think I'm getting a little better there. But with me and my last name, I should know all about pronouncing names. So he's a player that is very physical and has the athletic traits that you want. He's a huge guy. Now, some people project him as a guard, where I don't know where, it definitely depends, where, again, people look at these big hulking guys, depending on the foot speed. Do you want to kick him inside to play guard? Daniel Faalele is someone who projects to play inside at guard, but Salah is someone who I think could have a really big impact for them, but not this year. Developmental offensive line piece. I know some people want to see another wide receiver, another corner. I'd go B- C+ here. What wasn't my favorite pick. I can see what the Ravens' vision is. They lost Tristan Colon. This was before they signed Sam Mustipher, who we talked about on yesterday's show. So if you want more in-depth on the Ravens' newest signing, be sure to check out yesterday's show. Highly recommend personally. No bias involved. I know, I'm kidding. But I think for the Ravens, Salah's a player that is probably redshirted this year. I definitely wouldn't want to see him this year play, at least in high leverage situations. But if you're talking about like the perfect offensive line, what you want height wise and size wise and physical trait wise, he's powerful. He is a powerful guy, but just really raw right now. So yeah, I'm gonna go B- C+. Wasn't my favorite pick, and no disrespect, obviously. I think there's the potential there, but I would have maybe liked to see, I don't know, a corner. But again, the Ravens have so many corners. It's just like they still have a need there, but it's so interesting because there are like 7 or 8 guys, I think, who could make this roster right now, but I think you're only confident in 2 of them, in Marlon Humphrey and Rocky SC. And so maybe adding another corner wouldn't be the best play there. Maybe a defensive lineman. People, I think, maybe wanted to see that. Maybe a safety, maybe a center instead of a guard or something, or a tackle. So again, not my favorite, but definitely didn't hate it. As I think some people did. I don't know the reasoning behind it. I saw some stuff on Twitter where people, what's this pick? I think it was fine, but not my favorite. So B- C+ for Salah. And then finally, Andrew Voorhees. The Ravens actually trade back into the 7th round to take Andrew Voorhees. This is an A for me, an absolute home run. Voorhees was one of my favorite offensive line prospects before he went down with the torn ACL at the combine. And a brief history of that for those who don't know. I'm sure many do, but for those who don't know, Andrew Voorhees tore his ACL at the combine and ended up still doing the bench press with, the big knee brace on and the crutches. He pulls up in the crutches and does the most amount of reps out of anybody at the combine. Still with this huge brace on his leg. It was super, super impressive. And one of the feel-good stories of this draft. Now, is he going to play this year? I highly, highly doubt it. It definitely seems like, from what was reported on draft day, that the Ravens view him as a starter, but not this year. I think they're going to let him take the year, rehab, come back. Torn ACL in March. Similar situation to David Ojabo during his pro day when he tore his Achilles. The Ravens drafted Ojabo in the 2nd round, someone who was drafted, people mocked him. They drafted him to the Ravens before the draft at 14 overall. They ended up getting Kyle Hamilton at 14 and David Ojabo in the 2nd round. It was an incredible value pick. I think an incredible value pick here for the Ravens, the 7th round offensive lineman, someone who realistically probably would have been a 3rd or 4th rounder if he didn't get injured. So I think there is real potential, just like the Ravens believe it, I believe it, that Andrew Voorhees could start for them in 2024, next year, as either maybe their left guard if Ben Cleveland doesn't pan out the way they want to, or their right guard, depending on what happens with Kevin Zeitler in his future in Baltimore. So I give the Ravens an A-/B+ for this draft overall. My initial 2 weeks out, 3 weeks out draft grade for them, I think it was very solid, but not a draft class that has to contribute immediately. But the potential is there to where if you need to use one of these guys outside of Zay Flowers, if you need to use one of those guys this year, might be in a tad bit of trouble. I think Trenton Simpson, Kaihu'u Blue Kelly, I think all of them are capable. I think those two and obviously Zay Flowers, I think have the better potential of making an impact this season as opposed to a Salah or a Tavius Robinson or obviously Voorhees. But I give the Ravens credit. They made the most of their picks. They get one more. They take Voorhees. So I give them, again, B+/A-. That is my full draft grade for the Ravens in 2022. There you have it. And also I had a pretty good undrafted class too with Keaton Mitchell, Dante Demas, etc. But coming up in our final segment, we'll be talking mailbag. We'll get into a really good mailbag question. We'll dive in depth in that, and we'll be talking about what it could mean for the Ravens moving forward, and if this could be a year like 2019. So be sure to stay tuned. Still a lot to dive into on the show. We're back rounding out Locked On Ravens, our final segment here on Wednesday. Kevin Oestreicher still here with you, rocking with you here, and thank you so much for being here with us today. The Nuggets came off a big win in the first game of the Western Conference Finals. It was exhausting for me to watch. I mean, the Nuggets, they got it to such a huge lead. The Lakers came all the way back, almost won it. It's going to be a heck of a series. And thank you. You know, if you've listened to my Nuggets talk over the years, thank you for bearing with me on that. Be sure to subscribe on YouTube, follow along in audio form. Again, 5 days a week here on Locked On Ravens. So we will be rocking with you. It's every single day, literally every single weekday. I have not missed an episode since taking over the show in August of 2019. And that Ravens team in 2019 was incredible. And speaking of that, we got a mailbag question here from Braden Howard, who has a really good one. And this is super interesting to think about as we kind of gear up for the 2023 season. He says, do you think that this team throughout the season will receive comparisons to the 2019 squad? And how do you think they stack up in terms of team building and talent against them? And so I like this question from Braden because obviously that 2019 team, you stack it up against the teams in history, right? You look at that 2000 Ravens team, best defense ever, in my opinion. I know people talk about the 85 Bears and a couple other teams, but that 2000 Ravens defense was incredible. That 2019 Ravens offense was one of the best offenses in NFL history. So you have one great offense, one great defense. What can this team be? The 2023, the greatest special teams team of all time. No, I'm kidding. But I think when you look at the 2019 team, there are a couple of things to look at. First of all, I have the stats here. We'll read through a couple of them and then project a little bit, maybe what the Ravens could do this year. And I think today we'll the football school second part of that is coming up. So we'll talk about that on tomorrow's show. Get into what Mike McDonald had to say. Todd Monken had super interesting things to say, some hints about Lamar Jackson's usage. We talked about that last week. So hopefully we get some insight from Mike McDonald. I'm sure we will. But that 2019 team, let's start offensively. That obviously it was one of the best in multiple categories, rushing offense in NFL history. They had 596 attempts. That was by far the most in the NFL. They were first in attempts, first in yards per attempt, second in rushing touchdowns. I mean, they averaged 5.5 yards per attempt on almost 600 carries. It was an insane year to watch, but they were dead last. They were dead last in pass attempts. Now, that doesn't mean they weren't good throwing the football. Lamar obviously threw for 30-plus touchdowns and was incredible. He had incredible games throwing that year. And I think, again, people's they discredit him and they say, oh, well, where has he thrown for all these yards? How many games has he had where he's won it with his arm? People look at that and I think it's, well, Lamar, what are the clutch games? Lamar has those under his belt. He has led the Ravens to victories in clutch time with his arm. We saw it. Kansas City and Indianapolis, both primetime games. But what I counted as is games he won with his arm. That Miami game, he threw 5 touchdowns. He was cooking in that game. So to me, that was a little mini tangent. But the Ravens, again, first in rush attempts, dead last in pass attempts. They're actually 10th in passing in the league, in my opinion. I don't do it by pure yards. I do it by yards per attempt. So the Ravens were 27th in total passing yards, but the reason they were is because they didn't throw the ball a lot. They ended up being 10th in net yards per attempt at 6.9. So to me, the Ravens had the best rushing offense and the 10th best passing offense in the league. Now, compare that to what the Ravens could do this year. That was obviously Greg Roman's offense. It's Greg Roman's first full year after the Ravens got rid of Marty Mornhinweg. And obviously it was incredible. But what this Ravens team can do in 2023 is the personnel's just different. The Ravens receivers in 2019 was Marquise Brown's rookie year, Miles Boykin's rookie year as well. I mean, that team had Willie Snead on it, Chris Moore, DeAnthony Thomas. He tweets his name in all caps. Sometimes it's really funny. Seth Roberts was a key player for him. Jaleel Scott, Ravens legend Jaleel Scott was on that team. I mean, it's just so different this year. I mean, you have Odell, you have Rashad Bateman, you have Zay Flowers, Devin Duvernay, Nelson Aguilar. Maybe it's the James Prochet, Tylan Wallace, Dante Demas, whoever you want to put in that 6th spot. they have so much depth there this year. Todd Monken is known for throwing the football. He's known for getting the best out of his players. I don't see a world where the Ravens average the most rushing attempts in the least amount of passing attempts. And again, they've increased the amount of times over the course of the years after 2019. I mean, you look at some of those seasons, like we can just go through them. 2020, still, they were last in pass attempts. 2021, though, they had to pick it up because so many people were injured. They actually had the 9th most passing attempts that year because the whole running back room was hurt. And then last year, they ended up going kind of regressing back and having the 28th most pass attempts. So this year, I expect Baltimore to absolutely throw the heck out of the ball, but doesn't mean they're not going to run it. I still think this is going to be balanced where maybe they still, this could be a still top 10, top 12 in terms of attempts rushing offense. I would not put them out of the top half of the league in that regard. But passing attempts, I would not be shocked to see them creep up into the top 10, top 12. I think it's going to be that balanced attack, which Todd Monken understands as personnel. He understands he has the ability to throw the ball with Lamar and his ability, with the receivers he has, with Mark Andrews, etc. But I think he also understands that you have a couple of really good running backs in J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards, Justice Hill, maybe Keaton Mitchell makes this team, who knows. They're not just going to abandon those guys and abandon what has worked for them because under Greg Roman, the Ravens, really good rushing offenses. I don't think, and John Harbaugh said it, they don't want to just throw that to the wayside and never use it again. I think they're going to. So that's one area where, when you're talking about, is this team going to draw comparisons throughout the year? I mean, look, if they go 14-2 again, absolutely they will. But also you look at the defensive side of things that year, Baltimore struggled a lot in the first couple of weeks. Weeks 3 and 4 in particular, they gave up 500 total yards in both those games, which is just absolutely terrible. 503 in week 3 against Kansas City, 530 in week 4 against Cleveland. That Nick Chubb run still haunts me to this day, by the way. They were the 21st best rush defense, and then they were the 6th best pass defense. So really good at defending the pass. And look, they had guys on that defense, Marlon Humphrey and Jimmy Smith, and they traded for Marcus Peters, Earl Thomas. That was Earl Thomas's one and only year in Baltimore. But look, off the field, it was a disaster. On the field, Earl Thomas was really good. Chuck Clark played well for them. And then they had the other guys to kind of fill out things, like a Matthew Judon, who played well that year. LJ Fort and Josh Bynes were 2 huge additions. Tyus Bowser had 5 sacks that year. That was kind of his breakout. Brandon Williams played well for them as well. Jihad Ward contributed. Like they had guys who did a ton of good things for them. Brandon Carr still, you were able to use him in a bunch of different roles. So the Ravens defense, comparing that to what they have this year, I like the unit better this year, honestly. Roquan Smith, Patrick Queen in the middle of that defense, Trenton Simpson we talked about, but then it's other guys as well. Like Humphrey is still there. Rocky in the corner room is still definitely an issue. I like the Ravens corner room back then instead of what it is now. But again, Marlon Humphrey's that all-pro player. Safety-wise, the Marcus Williams, Kyle Hamilton duo, I think is really good. Geno Stone can play a role for them. Defensive line, Calais Campbell being gone does hurt a little bit, but Michael Pierce is there. And they also have the young guys, just Metabike and Broderick Washington, Travis Jones, Brent Urban. Outside linebacker, a little bit of an issue. Is it Aumavae-Laulu going to step up? Is David Ojabo going to step up? So there were holes on that Ravens defense too. Again, their run defense was not necessarily incredible, but I think this Ravens defense, if guys can step up, and if it's a big if, there are a bunch of questions to answer there, but if those guys can step up, I think that they could have a good year. I think this is going to be a little tougher though. At Cincinnati, this is their division. They're going to have to take it from them. So this is going to be a tough year because that 2019 team, the AFC was not what it is now in 2019. And then Braden also asked about the talent. How do they stack up in terms of team building and talent against them? So, what is this team compared to what the 2019 team was? I don't know. I feel like offensively, wide receiver-wise, obviously the room is so much better this year. Running back-wise, Mark Ingram scored 15 total touchdowns that year. This was before J.K. Dobbins. So would you rather have Mark Ingram, Gus Edwards, or J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards? It kind of depends what you like in that situation. So I don't know. It's interesting how you kind of compare those. And obviously, look, Lamar Jackson hasn't had an MVP season like that since 2019. But I think he has grown in areas and become a better player, both as a thrower and as a runner, just a quarterback, honestly, in general. So I think there are similarities in the two teams, 2019 and 2023, but I think there are going to be clear differences. I think the biggest one being they're going to throw the ball so much more than they did in 2019 here in 2023. But that's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in. Again, be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel on YouTube, and also follow along in audio form and subscribe over there as well. It's all free, no money involved here on Locked On Ravens. When we get back here tomorrow, more Ravens content here. So be sure to stay tuned for that, and I'll see you right back here tomorrow.